Hello friends, my name is Emile and welcome back to Reach the Peak, the show where I take the cars of Horizon 3 and set them on the toughest challenge they can face, a tight, twisty hill climb course high up in Blizzard Mountain. Today we have 5 vehicles here for you as usual, and we are going to be kicking things off with, well, one of my favourite cars of all time. This is the 2012 Aston Martin Vanquish, 565 horsepower, 457 foot-pound of torque, 3,844 pounds of weight. It is an S1 class car. 858 in PI when equipped with the snow tyres. It is the heaviest vehicle here today. So the Vanquish, I adore the Aston Martin Vanquish of 2012. This is a phenomenal looking car. In my opinion, this is the best looking car ever made. You know, a lot of people say, oh, it's the Jaguar E-Type or the Aston Martin DB5. Me, no, without question for me, it is the Vanquish. I love the smooth lines and all the rest of it, which is pretty interesting considering this car was kind of inspired by the 177, which I'm not a huge fan of, and the DBS, which, while that is a very good looking car, certainly isn't in my top 5 personally, but yeah, when they sort of came together, the Vanquish was an excellent looking thing. Also, I just love the engineering of it, of course. Naturally aspirated V12, as it should be. Rear wheel drive, big Grand Tourer, I love it. Anyways, on its actual driving characteristics, it is pretty good to drive. Of course, it is a little bit on the heavy side. This is a Grand Tourer, and while there are Grand Tourers that weigh more than this, this is still a fairly heavy car, you know, 3,800 pounds. That isn't light, but it has got the power to move it, certainly. It doesn't really get bogged down, which is kind of interesting, you know. These sort of heavier, more powerful vehicles do have the potential to, like, really struggle. Because, of course, you know, the weight and the power is essentially just pushing the rear wheels in, and they're just sort of starting to bog down and slip. But, no, the Vanquish doesn't really suffer from that. Maybe it's down to the fact that this thing doesn't produce a whole lot of torque, you know, 457 foot-pound. That isn't a hell of a lot, you know, that's about average, you know, for your sort of naturally aspirated supercars and so on. But yeah, the Vanquish is a really rather solid car to drive. Of course, you know, I much prefer to just look at this thing than actually drive it, because actually driving it on the road, it is a bit heavy, it isn't the greatest handling car in the world, but, you know, it's still perfectly usable if you would like to drive it instead of just sort of gawp at it in the auto show. Next up, we have a car that you certainly should drive and not just gawp at. This is the 2008 Dodge Viper SRT10 ACR, 600 horsepower, 560 foot-pound of torque, 3,408 pounds of weight. It is an S2 class car, 911 in PI. When equipped with these snow tyres, it is the most powerful vehicle here today, the torquiest vehicle here today, and the highest in PI. So, of course, I've spoken about this car several times on this channel. I love the ACR range of Vipers, and they're always fantastic handling cars. You know, the 99 Viper, really good car to drive. Pretty much all Vipers in pretty much every game I've played are usually pretty good to drive. But the ACRs in particular, you know, the 2008 and the 2016, they are absolutely phenomenal cars to drive. In my opinion, nothing in the game drives better than the 2016 Viper, and the 2008 Viper is a very, very close second on that. You know, you can throw a GT3 RS at this, you can throw whatever you want. Nothing handles as good as an ACR Viper, which is strange to say considering this thing is like some mega muscle car thing. Anyways, I was interested to see, however, how it would drive on snow. Of course, it is rear-wheel drive, it's got a lot of downforce, that's where a lot of its grip comes from. And considering, you know, this track's kind of more sort of low-speed corners, it won't have time to push downforce down, and of course rear-wheel drive means that the rear wheels will let go a lot more. In fact, it's a good car to drive. It might be a track car, but it feels really good. In fact, this might be one of the best track cars I've driven up here. It is a really very, very good handling car, which I wasn't expecting, to be perfectly honest with you, you know. 600 horsepower, that is when, yeah, you really usually start struggling up this hill climb course, especially if it's rear-wheel drive, but no, the Viper handled it solidly. Really nice car to drive, actually. Of course, interestingly enough, the 2016 Viper ACR is actually a leaderboard car up here, you know, if you all-wheel drive swap it and so on. In fact, currently, at least at the time I'm recording this, I'm actually second in the world up here in a 2016 Viper ACR, so yeah, if you attach all-wheel drive to them, they can be very, very good snow cars as it turns out, but even from stock, still really very, very good vehicles. Next up, this is a consistent theme today. There's a lot of my favourites in here, and this certainly is my favourite 911. This is the 1995 Porsche 911 GT2 424 horsepower, 398 foot-pound of torque, 2,855 pounds of weight. Is an S1 class car, 839 in PI. When equipped with these snow tyres, it is the lightest vehicle here today. So the 993 generation of 911 is my personal favourite. I just think it's the one that looks the best. And the GT2 is my favourite of all of them. I love the way this thing looks. You know, I love the massive wing on the back. I love the wide body arches. It's an awesome looking car. And, you know, of course you can put the RWB kit on, and I'm sure many people do. But in my opinion, stock, this is the way it should be driven. You know, the RWB kit's fine. It's not too horrendously ugly. But, yeah, this is definitely how I would run the car personally. Now, we've had quite a few 911s go up the course in recent weeks. We had the Carrera RS, of course, and that was a pretty good car to drive. This thing is bloody great, actually, to be perfectly honest with you. This is a really bloody good car, which I wasn't expecting. It's phenomenal in the snow. I really enjoyed driving this one. You know, that rear-engined, rear-drive combination, you'd think that'd, like, push a lot of weight over the rear, but because this car's so light, it doesn't really do that. And of course, you know, rear-engine, rear-drive means you get good acceleration. This thing essentially has, at least what it feels like, in some parts of the course, as much traction as an all-wheel drive car would. You know, it's absolutely incredible. Through the corners, you can carry a decent amount of speed. It doesn't get too wayward. It's a phenomenal car. If you put rally tyres on this thing and stuck some rally suspension on it, you would have a seriously quick rally car on your hands. It is a phenomenal driving machine, and yeah, I'm happy with that. Of course, you know, my favourite 911 happens to be a really very good car. Of course, you know, in the recent weeks we will have to see how other 911s fare, whether any of them will be as good as the mighty GT2, but yeah, as of right now, that is the benchmark for how a 911 should drive up this course. It is great. Next up, we move on to a car which not a lot of people in Forza probably get interested by, but personally I kind of like it. It's the 2015 Jaguar XE-S, 340 horsepower, 332 foot-pound of torque, 3,787 pounds of weight. Is an S1 class car, 808 in PI when equipped with the snow tyres, and yeah. So the XE-S, essentially what this car is it's supposed to be a rival to the BMW M3, and so on. In my opinion, you know, sort of statistics-wise, I think it's more of a rival for the Volvo S60 Polestar. Of course, the Polestar has all-wheel drive, so up here there's no real comparison there, but yeah, I do like the XE-S. It's a really, I think it looks really good. It's a really sort of slick, professional-looking car. Personally, I prefer the way the Alfa Romeo Giulia looks. I think that's a better-looking car in this sort of class segment, but the XE-S, it's a cool looking car, and for me personally, I think this car's way more interesting than any BMW M3, you know, C43, I believe that's the car now. You know, it's way more interesting than a BMW, Mercedes, or an Audi, in my opinion, so yeah. And I'm not just saying that because I'm British. Anyways, as far as this car goes, it's pretty good. It has a really great gearbox for this. It is an 8-speed gearbox, I believe, but it's a really close ratio transmission. You can essentially keep in the power band very well in this vehicle. It's a solid car to drive up here. Personally, I think this drives better than any M3 we've had up here. No, the M3s are fine to drive up here usually. You know, most sports coupes are. But I think this is better handling than most of the other sports coupes we've had. It might just be for that gearbox, because the gearbox is phenomenal in this thing. But yeah, really good car to drive, which makes me happy because, of course, I do like the XE. Also worth mentioning is this thing actually has a slightly sort of softer suspension setup. You don't really notice it when you're driving on the road, but when you're actually driving up here, it does mean that this car is a little bit more controllable than maybe a track-ready M3 or M4 might be. So yeah, really very good car. If you haven't driven the XE-S yet, it might be worth a shot because it is a pretty cool car to drive, and it looks pretty good as well. Anyways, finally today we have yeah, it's another one of my favourite cars. It's the 2013 Ford Focus ST, 247 horsepower, 265 foot-pound of torque, 2,976 pounds of weight. It's an A-class car, 735 in PI. It is the least powerful vehicle here today, the least torquey vehicle here today, and the lowest in PI, of course. It's also the only front-wheel drive car today, which, as we've seen in previous episodes, certainly is not a bad thing, because usually front-wheel drive cars are pretty darn good. So, yeah, the Focus ST, I love this thing. You know, rather controversially, and I'm sure not many people agree with me, personally this is my favourite Focus of them all. In fact, it might very well be one of my favourite Fords. I really like the way the 2013 Focus ST looks, and, you know, while they did ditch the Volvo engine, which is a little bit saddening because I did like the 5-cylinder, it is still a great car. You know, it looks really good, and in my opinion, at least when this thing came out, it was the best hot hatch in its class. You know, you had the Astra VXR, you had the Renault Megane, but this thing is much more of a livable car to drive and live with. Of course, you know, now we've got the Civic Type R, which I think might sway me a little bit because I'm a bit biased because I love the Civic, but yeah, Focus ST is a great car. As far as it is to drive, it's a great car. It drives, every car here today drives really very well. This thing does understeer slightly. Again, you'd kind of expect, like, you know, 250 horsepower, front wheel drive hot hatch. You are going to get a little bit of understeer. But it's a good car to drive. You know, I enjoyed it, certainly. I've driven this thing on land a few times, and in my personal opinion, I think this drives better than any Astra VXR, Renault Megane, or, you know, whatever you want to throw at it. I can't really think of any other hot hatches produced around that time in this game. But, yeah, you know, it is a good car to drive. I've always liked it. And, you know, I've tuned these up before. They're pretty good. I wouldn't push the power too much, because, of course, you don't want too much power circulating through a front-wheel drive car. But, yeah, they are solid vehicles to drive, and I would wholeheartedly recommend you give the Focus ST a go. You know, I know it's probably forgotten now that we got the 2017 Focus RS. But it is still a really rather good car to drive. Anyways, we move on to the times today, and pretty much everything placed within this category. The fastest car today was the Viper ACR, going to 49th with a 209.697. Slightly off of a 599 XX, and a bit quicker than a 5 Turbo. The 911 GT2 is in 54th place with a 211.035. Half second slower than a V60 Polestar, but it is quicker than a McLaren P1 and an Impreza, which is pretty cool. And the Aston Martin Vanquish goes into 57th place with 211.468. It is quicker than a Lykan Hypersport, a little bit off of the Impreza. So yeah, pretty good times from all of those cars, to be honest. Dropping down the board some more, we find the Jaguar XE-S in 94th with a 216.970. Aptly, it is a little bit slower than an E92 M3, although personally that might be just... I prefer the way the XE-S drives just because the E92 has more power. It is quicker than an NSX and a Celica GT4 though, which is pretty darn good going from that vehicle. And finally today, the Focus ST, while it may be the final car on this list, it certainly didn't place too badly. 103rd with a 218.471, beats a Lancia Delta Integrale by 1,000th of a second, beats Shelby Cobra by 2,000ths of a second, beats the Astra VXR as well, which is a pretty darn good feat. Anyways, friends, I want to thank you all very much for watching this episode of Reach the Peak, and until next time, friends, a farewell.